In the early years of World War II, British engineers were desperate. The German Blitzkrieg had torn through Europe with unstoppable tanks, and Britain feared invasion. The army needed an anti-tank weapon that could be carried by a single man, something small, simple, and deadly. What they came up with looked absurd: a glass sphere filled with nitroglycerin, covered in sticky adhesive, and meant to be thrown by hand. They called it the sticky bomb. When the first prototypes appeared in 1940, even British soldiers laughed. It was dangerous to use, unstable to handle, and had a nasty habit of sticking to everything except the target. But it worked, when it worked. Against armor plating, the explosive could burn through metal like butter. And though many doubted it, the sticky bomb would later prove its worth in combat across North Africa, Italy, and Normandy. But few knew that this strange weapon, so simple and crude, would one day shock even the Germans themselves. By 1942, captured examples of the British sticky bomb began to appear in German hands. The Wehrmacht's engineers, experts in design and precision, received one from a battlefield in Tunisia. They brought it to their testing centers, curious and amused. To them, it looked like a child's toy, not a weapon worthy of respect. At Rechlin and Kummersdorf, two of Germany's most advanced research facilities, teams of scientists and ordnance specialists began their evaluation. They examined the crude construction, the fragile glass shell, and the viscous, sticky coating that covered its surface. Compared to German precision-made weapons like the Panzerfaust or Tellermine, it was primitive, almost laughable. One officer supposedly remarked, "If this is what they fight with, we have nothing to fear." But as they soon discovered, the sticky bomb was not to be mocked. When tested under controlled conditions, the first detonation shocked everyone present. The explosion was far more powerful than expected. Even though the device was small, the shaped blast of nitroglycerin tore through armor plating designed to resist far heavier charges. It didn't bounce. It clung, melted, and ripped through the steel. The laughter stopped. The Germans had underestimated it. This crude British invention had achieved something their engineers had spent years refining: a portable anti-tank charge that could defeat armor at close range. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. And in war, effectiveness mattered more than pride. As the smoke cleared from the test range, the German engineers realized that this sticky little sphere, so easy to mock, was a weapon that could change the rules of close combat. The German engineers gathered around the crater in silence. What lay before them was not just a hole in a steel plate, it was a hole in their assumptions. The sticky bomb, despite its crude appearance, had done what many of their own early designs had failed to do. It had penetrated hardened armor with terrifying efficiency. They repeated the test, thinking it might have been luck. Another sticky bomb was carefully attached to the side of a captured Panzer III hull. When it detonated, the result was the same. Armor peeled open, molten steel dripping to the floor. The engineers could see how the weapon clung perfectly to the surface, its adhesive holding long enough to deliver maximum destruction. This simple, ugly weapon had forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the enemy's technology. The Germans were known for their engineering brilliance. The Panther, the Tiger, and the V-2 rocket were products of meticulous design. But the sticky bomb was something else entirely. It was born not of luxury, but desperation. Where the Germans engineered perfection, the British engineered survival. And that survival instinct had created something shockingly practical. The weapon's effectiveness came from the chemistry of its nitroglycerin gel and the simplicity of its design. No complex mechanisms, no expensive materials, just raw, controlled destruction. At Kummersdorf, notes from the test described the sticky bomb as brilliantly unrefined. One report even admitted that its primitive construction belies its deadly purpose. For German engineers who prided themselves on precision and beauty in machinery, this weapon was a paradox, chaotic but efficient. They began running comparisons. Could they improve on the concept? Could a similar charge be produced with German materials? Within weeks, design sketches emerged for an adaptation. A magnetic mine that could cling to tanks, inspired directly by what the British had built. It wasn't long before this idea became the Haftolladung, a three-legged magnetic anti-tank charge that worked on the same principle. The British sticky bomb had unknowingly influenced German weapon design. What had started as laughter in the test range had turned into imitation, the sincerest form of respect in wartime engineering. Still, even as they copied the idea, the Germans couldn't shake a strange sense of unease. They had mocked the Allies as clumsy and inferior, yet here was proof that ingenuity didn't need perfection. In that cracked British glass sphere, they saw something they had forgotten: adaptability. And in war, adaptability could be more powerful than any machine. As testing continued, the fascination of the German engineers grew into something deeper, a reluctant admiration. They had underestimated the British capacity for innovation under pressure. The sticky bomb wasn't the product of a well-funded weapons lab or a vast military industrial machine. It was the brainchild of necessity, of soldiers fighting with what little they had. By 1940, Britain had stood nearly alone against the German war machine. The fear of invasion was real, and the nation's military was desperate for ways to stop German tanks if they landed on British soil. Out of that desperation came the sticky bomb, a weapon born in a small workshop, not a factory. The design was brutally simple: a glass sphere filled with nitroglycerin-based explosive, covered with a sticky adhesive and wrapped in a protective casing. The idea was to remove the casing, throw or slap it against an enemy tank, and let the explosive adhere before detonating. It was dangerous to use, even for the person deploying it. But in those days, risk didn't matter. Results did. When German intelligence first recovered samples of the bomb from captured equipment, they laughed. Reports from the front described British soldiers using them with mixed success, sometimes even injuring themselves. To the German high command, it seemed amateurish, another example of what they called British improvisation. But when the engineers at Kummersdorf tested it for themselves, the laughter stopped. They saw that the flaws were outweighed by the raw effectiveness. The bomb worked on any steel surface, regardless of shape or angle. It didn't rely on precision. It relied on direct contact and raw explosive force. One test officer later wrote, "It is a soldier's weapon, not a technician's." That statement carried weight in a country where war had become a contest of design. The sticky bomb reminded them that victory was not always about elegance. Sometimes it was about simplicity and courage. The Germans tried to replicate the concept, replacing the sticky coating with magnets for safety and consistency. But they knew who had inspired it, and that stung their pride. As 1941 rolled on, reports began arriving from the Eastern Front. Soviet troops were using similar improvised explosives to disable tanks. To the engineers, it was another sign. The age of perfect machines was ending. The age of practical destruction had begun. And deep down, the men at Kummersdorf understood. The sticky bomb wasn't just a weapon, it was a philosophy, one that favored adaptability over arrogance. By late 1941, the tests at Kummersdorf had evolved beyond curiosity. The German engineers, once dismissive of the sticky bomb, now studied it with scientific precision. They had realized that this crude British invention represented something terrifying, a weapon that leveled the playing field. It made any man, no matter how untrained or poorly equipped, capable of stopping a tank. They began to test variations. They experimented with different adhesives, attempting to replicate the strange tar-like compound that allowed the bomb to cling even to cold metal. They replaced the British nitroglycerin mix with more stable German explosives, hoping to reduce the risk of premature detonation. Every test brought new discoveries and new respect for the men who had first conceived the idea. One German report from late 1941 read, "The enemy has created a device that trades safety for certainty. It demands courage, not distance." That line struck a chord with the officers present. German doctrine had always favored the machine, the precision-engineered tank, the advanced aircraft, the perfect rifle. But here was something different, a weapon that relied not on technology, but on human resolve. At the same time, on the battlefields of North Africa, the sticky bomb was already earning its reputation. British soldiers of the 8th Army, facing Rommel's Afrika Korps, used the weapon in desperate encounters. There, under the burning sun and the roar of tank engines, the sticky bomb proved its worth. A single infantryman could ambush a panzer, sprinting forward under fire to attach the bomb before diving for cover. It was suicidal, but it worked. News of these successes reached Berlin, and suddenly what had been considered a crude toy was now seen as a threat. The engineers began to understand what this meant strategically. If the British could arm thousands of soldiers with these cheap improvised bombs, it could nullify one of Germany's greatest advantages, its armored divisions. In a confidential note, one officer wrote, "The Englishman has replaced our precision with desperation, and in this there is strength." The sticky bomb forced a realization that no one in the German testing command wanted to admit. The war would not be decided solely by the sophistication of weapons, but by the creativity and will of those who wielded them. It was a strange moment, when laughter turned to silence and mockery turned to respect. The German engineers had not just tested a weapon, they had tested an idea that, like the bomb itself, stuck and refused to be shaken off. By early 1942, the German engineers at Kummersdorf had turned their attention from ridicule to imitation. They had studied the British sticky bomb for months, its failures, its hazards, and its horrifying potential. What had begun as a crude curiosity had now become a blueprint. The Reich wanted its own version. Their experiments focused on making the weapon safer and more reliable. The British design had one fatal flaw. It was as dangerous to the user as to the target. The nitroglycerin-based explosive could detonate prematurely, and the glass casing often cracked under rough handling. The Germans replaced it with a steel shell and used TNT instead of liquid explosive. But the most important change came from an observation noted by one engineer. The weapon's greatest weakness is also its strength. It demands proximity. To use a sticky bomb, a soldier had to get within a few meters of a tank. To the Germans, this was madness. But to those who had watched British infantrymen at Tobruk and El Alamein, it was courage made tangible. Reports from the Afrika Korps described small British squads ambushing German armor in the night. Men with sticky bombs would wait behind dunes or wrecked trucks, sprinting from cover to slap the explosive onto a panzer's treads or rear armor. Entire German columns had been delayed or destroyed by a handful of desperate soldiers carrying nothing more than glass and glue. These stories disturbed the German high command. If such a simple device could cripple their elite tanks, then no amount of engineering superiority would guarantee safety. At Kummersdorf, the engineers reported their findings to Berlin. Their tone was no longer dismissive. They called the sticky bomb a weapon of bravery, one that blurred the line between technology and human will. One senior officer wrote in his final report, "The British weapon is imperfect, but its spirit is perfect." That sentence captured something profound, an acknowledgement that the British had built not just a device, but a symbol of defiance. The Germans never fully adopted a direct copy of the sticky bomb. Instead, they took inspiration from it, creating the Haftholedung, a magnetic anti-tank grenade that could be attached to steel armor. It was safer, more efficient, and far more German in design, precise, engineered, and deadly. Yet even as they perfected their version, many remembered the crude British original that had inspired it. The sticky bomb had proven something the Germans had long denied, that ingenuity could outmatch precision, and desperation could breed innovation. And in the shadows of the testing range, as another tank carcass burned from a perfectly placed explosion, one of the engineers was heard to say, "They laughed first, but they learned faster." By mid-1942, word of the sticky bomb's effectiveness had spread far beyond the battlefields of North Africa. From Tunisia to the ruins of Crete, German tank crews began to whisper about British soldiers carrying glass grenades that clung to steel like nightmares. For a time, the idea alone was enough to cause unease in the ranks. A lone infantryman with one of these crude explosives could stop a panzer column, if he was brave enough to get close. In Berlin, the reports continued to pour in. Field officers described tanks disabled in narrow streets, ambushes sprung from basements, and wrecks marked by strange burns where the adhesive charges had struck. The German High Command had mocked the concept at first, calling it child's chemistry. Now they were asking for countermeasures. Crews were ordered to coat vulnerable sections of their tanks with anti-stick paste, a mixture of sand and oil that made surfaces slick. In some units, wire mesh was fitted around the hulls to keep explosives from adhering. It was a small but telling change, proof that an idea once ridiculed now commanded respect. At the Kummersdorf Proving Ground, engineers continued their trials. They tested both captured British sticky bombs and their new magnetic grenades, comparing the results side by side. Time and again, they found that while the sticky bomb was unreliable, it was brutally effective when it worked. Tanks that should have been invincible were cracked open like eggs. The simple charge, when placed right, could destroy even a Panzer IV. One report stated plainly, "We underestimated their desperation, and we underestimated what desperation can create." What fascinated the German scientists most was the British design philosophy. Unlike the complex, beautifully machined German weapons, the sticky bomb was rough, almost improvised, but it could be mass-produced quickly, in enormous quantities, with minimal skill or material. This was war made industrial and psychological. The Germans began to realize that their enemy's strength wasn't just in technology, but in adaptability. The British could lose equipment, territory, even men, and still return stronger because they learned faster and built simpler. By late 1942, the sticky bomb was no longer seen as a joke. In the official German Technical Digest, one paragraph stood out. "The British soldier's weapon is crude yet effective. It relies not on precision, but on courage." It was an unspoken admission that machines could be outmatched by willpower. The engineers who once laughed at the strange glass grenade now treated it as a serious weapon, one that had forced the mighty Panzer divisions to adapt, to rethink, to fear. In war, the smallest ideas can cast the longest shadows. The sticky bomb had proven that. A device born from scarcity and desperation had managed to shake the confidence of one of the most formidable armies in history. And as another field report arrived at Kummersdorf describing yet another tank destroyed by one of these strange adhesive charges, a German colonel was said to have sighed and remarked, "We thought we were fighting soldiers. We are fighting inventors." As 1943 unfolded, the war entered a new and darker phase. The Eastern Front was consuming men and machines at a terrifying pace, and German industries struggled to keep up. Yet in the quiet testing ranges of Kummersdorf, engineers still studied their enemy's inventions, hoping to uncover the secrets behind Allied adaptability. Among the clutter of captured weapons, one object continued to fascinate them: the British sticky bomb. The sticky bomb had been designed as a last resort, but for the German analysts, it represented something deeper, a kind of warfare that favored simplicity over sophistication. Where the Reich built through precision and discipline, the British improvised. The bomb's crude construction, a glass sphere, explosive jelly, and adhesive casing, was an insult to German engineering pride. And yet it worked. At first they tried to improve it. They tested new adhesives, new casings, new trigger systems. But every time they refined the weapon, it lost what made it powerful: its raw, desperate practicality. The German versions were too complex, too fragile, or too costly to mass produce. The British had built a weapon of chaos. The Germans were trapped in their obsession with perfection. Field reports showed that sticky bombs were appearing in more theaters of war, not just in Britain's hands, but among resistance groups across occupied Europe. In Denmark, partisans used improvised versions to disable German convoys. In Yugoslavia, guerrillas attached crude adhesive charges to armored trains. The design had escaped the laboratory. It had become a symbol of rebellion. To the German command, this was alarming. A weapon that required no factory, no engineer, no complex logistics, just courage and a handful of basic materials, was spreading faster than they could suppress it. It became another front in the invisible war of ingenuity. By now, the engineers at Kummersdorf had stopped laughing. They began cataloging each captured sample with meticulous care, noting chemical composition, detonation velocity, and temperature resistance. They even conducted psychological studies on soldiers' reactions to the weapon. One chilling conclusion emerged: the fear of adhesion, of being trapped, magnifies the weapon's impact beyond its physical effect. That line would haunt the analysts. The sticky bomb wasn't just an explosive. It was a psychological equalizer. It taught the infantryman that he could fight armor, that even the smallest soldier could destroy the strongest machine. One report, recovered after the war, summarized the German verdict. The English device lacks sophistication, but its concept is ingenious. It relies not on technology, but on will. This is its danger. Behind the neat handwriting of that assessment was a quiet realization that ingenuity, not perfection, would win the war. In the years to come, the lessons learned from the sticky bomb would ripple through both sides of the conflict. Simplicity had become a weapon, one far more dangerous than any engineer had first imagined. The Germans had tested it, mocked it, and feared it. But the truth had become undeniable. The British sticky bomb, for all its clumsiness, had done something no other weapon could. It had made even the most powerful army on Earth afraid to underestimate its enemy again. By early 1944, the German High Command had moved on to newer priorities: the V weapons, advanced tanks, and jet aircraft. But among the engineers who had tested the British sticky bomb, the memory of that strange, primitive device lingered. It represented something they could never quite replicate, a weapon built not from abundance, but from desperation. And yet somehow, it worked. As Allied forces pushed through Italy and prepared for the invasion of France, the lessons of the sticky bomb began to echo in Allied weapons design. British and American engineers took the same principle: portable anti-tank explosives, and refined it. Out of that lineage came the PIAT and later the bazooka, weapons that combined the simplicity of the sticky bomb with improved range and safety. For the Germans observing from afar, it was a troubling realization. What they had dismissed as crude and laughable had evolved into a class of weapons now devastating their armored divisions. Tanks that once rolled confidently through the front lines were now vulnerable from every hedgerow, every street corner, every ditch. The humble adhesive bomb had sparked a revolution in infantry warfare. Meanwhile, deep within German-occupied territories, resistance groups continued using improvised versions of the weapon. They filled bottles with flammable gel, crafted makeshift detonators, and struck German convoys from the shadows. To the Wehrmacht, these were not traditional soldiers. They were ghosts, armed with nothing but courage and stolen ingenuity. It was an irony few Germans cared to admit. The weapon that had once symbolized British desperation was now haunting them across Europe. Their own captured reports, those same pages filled with mockery, had become bitter reminders of underestimation. In the archives of Kummersdorf, test results remained preserved. Notes described how one sticky bomb had torn through the side armor of a Panzer III during testing, its gelatinous explosive molding perfectly to the steel. Engineers had observed how it bypassed the tank's sloped armor, a weakness few weapons of the time could exploit. They had documented the damage, and then dismissed it as unrealistic in battlefield conditions. But on the battlefields of Normandy, unrealistic became reality. Allied infantrymen, armed with improved versions of that same idea, brought German tanks to a halt. In the chaos of close combat, a single soldier could now destroy a machine worth a dozen men. The sticky bomb's legacy wasn't one of beauty or precision. It was one of adaptation, proof that necessity breeds invention. It showed the world that victory doesn't always belong to the side with the most advanced machines, but to those who can think simplest under pressure. As Germany's war fortunes collapsed, many of the men who had once laughed at that strange British invention began to understand its deeper meaning. It wasn't just a weapon of war, it was a mirror, reflecting a truth their own system refused to see: that sometimes improvisation is the ultimate form of power. And in the ruins of 1,000 battlefields, the echoes of that lesson endured. The idea that even the smallest spark of ingenuity could turn the tide of history. By the spring of 1944, the German war machine was beginning to crumble under the relentless weight of Allied industry. Yet even as new front lines opened, the lessons from the sticky bomb continued to resurface. Deep within testing centers across Germany, engineers quietly experimented with similar designs: magnetic charges, adhesive explosives, shaped warheads. The irony was inescapable. The same weapon they once mocked had inspired a generation of their own anti-tank tools. One of these weapons, the Haftolladung, a magnetic hollow charge, was directly influenced by the principles seen in the sticky bomb. Though more advanced in design, its function was eerily similar. A soldier had to approach the tank closely, attach the device, and retreat before detonation. It required immense bravery, or desperation. The Germans had learned from the British, but at great cost. Meanwhile, across Europe, Allied troops were using newer iterations of the idea in real combat. In the hedgerows of Normandy, in the narrow streets of Caen, and along the forests of the Ardennes, small teams armed with handheld explosives destroyed tanks worth thousands of man-hours and tons of steel. The battlefield had shifted from the domination of machines to the cunning of men. In one particularly bitter twist, captured German officers during the final year of the war were shown Allied footage of infantry destroying Panthers and Tigers with portable anti-tank weapons. Many refused to believe it at first, until engineers confirmed the reality. The principles they had once ridiculed had not only survived but triumphed. The sticky bomb's crude beginnings had evolved into an entire doctrine: mobility over mass, ingenuity over intimidation. The weapon that started as a desperate experiment in Britain's darkest days had become a foundation of modern infantry tactics. But the sticky bomb's real victory was psychological. It changed how soldiers thought about combat. No longer did infantrymen have to feel helpless before the might of tanks. They could fight back directly, personally, and effectively. That single shift in morale, multiplied across thousands of battlefields, had an immeasurable impact on the war's outcome. By the final months of 1944, as the Allies pushed deeper into occupied Europe, German engineers and officers were forced to confront the full consequence of their underestimation. Their initial laughter, their dismissal of the toy-like British invention, had turned into quiet respect and, in many cases, regret. In later interviews, surviving German engineers spoke candidly about their impressions. They admitted that, at first, the sticky bomb appeared absurd, a weapon out of desperation, but once they saw its results in combat, they understood its brilliance. One engineer described it as a simple solution to a complex problem, something we, in our obsession with perfection, failed to achieve. The story of the sticky bomb became more than a tale of engineering. It became a lesson about the nature of innovation itself. When you strip war down to its essence, the victor is rarely the one with the most resources, but the one who adapts fastest. The sticky bomb, born from fear and necessity, embodied that truth. And in the closing days of the Second World War, it served as a quiet reminder to those who once thought themselves untouchable, that even the humblest idea can change the course of history. As the war neared its end in 1945, the lessons of the sticky bomb echoed across both sides of the conflict. What began as a desperate weapon of defense had, through sheer practicality, forced the German war machine to rethink how wars were fought and how machines could be defeated by willpower and ingenuity alone. When Allied forces entered captured German research facilities, they found extensive documentation, notes, test results, and blueprints showing how the Wehrmacht had studied, dissected, and improved upon the very weapon they had once mocked. These experiments, conducted at proving grounds like Kummersdorf and Hillersleben, revealed just how deeply the sticky bomb had unsettled German engineers. They had realized, far too late, that technology did not always have to be elegant to be effective. The Germans had learned that brute force alone could not ensure dominance. A single man with courage and a clever tool could alter the balance of an entire battle. It was a revelation that arrived only when their empire was crumbling. After the war, many of the surviving German engineers went on to work in civilian industries, some even contributing to post-war reconstruction efforts. In interviews years later, a few admitted a lingering respect for the simplicity of the British design. One reportedly said, "We built weapons of perfection. They built weapons of necessity, and theirs worked across Europe." The memory of the sticky bomb lived on, not as a symbol of destruction, but as a testament to human resourcefulness under pressure. It had saved lives, changed tactics, and taught a powerful lesson: that the mind, not the machine, decides the outcome of war. The British soldiers who first carried sticky bombs into battle rarely saw themselves as innovators. They were ordinary men, mechanics, farmers, clerks, thrust into extraordinary circumstances. When they hurled those crude glass bombs against advancing tanks, they were doing what war demands of those who wish to survive: adapt, improvise, endure. And through that endurance, they reshaped history. When historians today look back at World War II, the sticky bomb is often remembered as a footnote, a strange, dangerous weapon of early Allied desperation. But to those who fought on the ground, it was far more. It represented hope, proof that even against overwhelming odds, the human spirit could invent, resist, and prevail. On battlefields from North Africa to Normandy, it was not just tanks or aircraft that won the day, but the will of those who refused to surrender. Those who found strength in simplicity, courage in crisis, and victory in invention. In the end, the sticky bomb did more than destroy steel. It shattered arrogance, redefined ingenuity, and reminded both sides that no empire, no machine, and no army was beyond the reach of human determination. It was not beauty that won the war, it was resilience. And sometimes it began with something as small, as absurd, and as powerful as a sticky bomb. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more World War II stories.